Ladies and gentlemen, it's 3 p.m. I'd like to call this regular council meeting to order. I want to start with the adoption of the agenda. Can I have a motion for that, please? Councillor Elliott, Councillor Charlotte, all in favor? Motion's carried. Move on to the adoption of the minutes. Adoption of the minutes for the special council meeting of December 11th, 2018. Do I have a motion for that? Councillor Brooks Hill, Councillor Elliott, all in favor? Motion's carried. Move on to the regular council meeting minutes of dated December 11th, 2018. Do I have a motion for that? Councillor Cross, Councillor Charlotte, all in favor? Motion's carried. Is there any business arising from the regular council minutes of December 11th, 2018? Councillor Yonker.
Yeah, I have a question, Your Worship. I'm not sure if it should go to our corporate officer or our CAO, Mr. Chabot. Do I need to create a motion in regards to bring back the cannabis bylaw to review and discuss? Or can we discuss
Your Worship, when Councillor Yonker asked me that question before, I was reluctant to add it on the council agenda at the request of one member of council, but my suggestion was to him, was bring it up as a subject under business arising from the minutes, and you can do either that now, if you wish, or you could probably give it, does the notice of motion have to be in writing?
No, it can be by a resolution at the meeting, or it can be to the corporate officer after the meeting, to prepare for the next meeting.
Okay. So would you prefer that I do a notice of a motion to put it? I'm just asking what the actual procedure would be better to do. Would I do a notice of motion then? That would ensure we go on to the next agenda? Okay, I'll do that then. Thank you.
Okay, that's it?
Yep. You could do it at the meeting right now, or you could do it.
If I did a verbal notice of motion, we would discuss it right now? Okay.
Do you want to discuss it now?
You could do a verbal notice of a motion.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just let council know about it, but then it would come forward at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to do verbal notice of motion now, Councillor.
Well, if I don't know the proper procedure, what I have to read, then I'll just read it. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, you're going to do it after then?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Worship.
All right. Is there any other business from those minutes anyone wants to bring up? And the special council meeting minutes of December 11th, 2018, any business arising from those minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go on to the announcements from the mayor. First of all, I want to wish everybody Happy New Year on behalf of City Council and all our staff, and thank you for coming out today. It's kind of nice to see the room full. We'd like to see you here every meeting throughout the year. Fill it up. Pay's really not generous, but we love to have you here, so thank you for coming. Secondly, I want to formally welcome our new Director of Planning, Marianne Wade. Marianne, you're here in the room. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining our group. We appreciate that. I also want to thank everyone in the community, but even those on staff and in council that were instrumental in helping to pull off the community Christmas dinner on Christmas Day. So much appreciated. I work on that committee kind of behind the scenes, and I was away this year, but there were so many others that took my place, and I really appreciate that. So thank you all who were involved. And I want to thank everyone in the community who came out to the holiday train, who contributed, and thank CP Rail for the $10,000 contribution to Community Connections. So much appreciated. So we're going to go on to item 7, delegations and presentations. Here with us this afternoon, Melissa Hemphill is going to present on growing our food security. Melissa, you're up.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Realize there's other passionate topics on the agenda, so thanks for indulging me. So I'm here today to just give you a summary of the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page and understand what food security is. An easy definition is that food security exists when all people have access at all times to safe, affordable, nutritious food. And I'm going to offer a community food security definition as well. So community food security is a situation in which all community residents obtain a safe, culturally acceptable, nutritionally adequate diet through a sustainable food system that maximizes community self-resilience and social justice. So a little bit more layered in there. So first of all, why do we care about food security? Why is it a concern? Well, there's global threats and local threats. A lot of those global threats are out of our hands in a large way, but we all contribute to them. So things like climate change, water issues, population growth, all of that affects our food system and how we access our food. And then locally, we've got a lot of issues at hand dealing with our historic loss of farmland, the development pressure on land use and the resulting high cost of land, the relative high cost of living, our aging farmers, loss of knowledge that comes with that, and then here in Revelstoke, the transportation and distribution challenges that we face. So the results of that is a somewhat broken food system, resulting in higher food prices, higher food bank usage, just a general disconnection from the food system and where our food comes from and how we trust it and how it feeds and nourishes us. Our food security strategy commissioned by the City of Revelstoke found that 92% of our food is imported from outside of 250 kilometers. So really highlighting how vulnerable we are as a community and why we need to look at what we can do to mitigate that. And just a general loss of food sovereignty or control due to all the globalization that happens within the food system. And the reason I bring this to the council and why this is a municipal issue, I'm going to read from a couple documents here that talk about the future of food in BC. So at a time when extended droughts are forecast for California, when the volatility of international economics and geopolitics affect the price and availability of food imports, development of sustainable, economically viable food systems in BC must be understood as a practical and forward-thinking goal for British Columbians. And then in terms of your power as local government, despite the weight and scope of policy at federal and provincial levels that dominate the policy landscape, local government is implicated in food systems. However, how and why food intersects with local government can be as opaque to those within government as it is to civil society. For example, though, local government can influence access to healthy food through zoning bylaws and transportation policy. It can support local agriculture through space for farmers markets and bylaws that protect agricultural land, and it can implement actions to support community-based food programming. So you guys have a lot of power over our food system, so I encourage you to learn about it. And so with all of those problems that are going on globally and locally, the solutions that we're looking at as a province is relocalization. So localizing our food system contributes to achieving environmental stewardship, economic development, and sustainability goals. And that's what brings me to this work, is that it's all-encompassing. It affects all of us every single day and will affect us greatly in the future. So looking back at where the food work has come from in Revelstoke, the North Columbia Environmental Society had their local food initiative subcommittee years ago that's now gone on to form its own society. But under the NCES, they developed the Revelstoke Food Charter, which was ratified by City Council, the school district, and a whole bunch of other organizations. And it's a guiding document that provides a vision for our future and what we can do to increase our food system here. Then the city commissioned a food security strategy to look at what's going on currently and what we need to be doing in the future, so provided a big list of recommendations. One of those recommendations was to hire a food security coordinator to implement the rest of the recommendations. So Community Connections agreed to take that on, and I've been in this position for about 3.5 years now working on that. So the goals that were in that food security strategy that were developed as a community project, first off is our access to food, that everybody can get the food that they need, that we are encouraging environmentally sustainable food production, and thinking about the impacts of growing all the food that we need, celebrating and knowing our food culture, what our food needs are and what's great about that, looking at this from an economic lens and making sure that our food system is economically sustainable, and providing education about what a healthy food system is and all of the aspects that go into that. So lots of great high lofty goals, but some really solid recommendations to reach those goals as well. So the funding for the work that I've been doing, a lot of it comes from Interior Health with some funding matched by the City of Revelstoke. Columbia Basin Trust has been very generous, as has the Real Estate Foundation of BC, so some really strong supporters there. And lots of players in this work. There's lots of partnerships and collaborations and lots of committees that I sit on and lots of work that we do together. It's not a one-man show by any means. So in year one, in 2016, we received the Community Food Action Initiative funding from Interior Health with matching funding from the City of Revelstoke. And some of the highlights of the work completed in that first year were the development of the Food Recovery Program, which you're probably all familiar with. We started the Superlicious community food event. We conducted a food co-op feasibility study, started forming a farmer networking group so we can get together and talk about local issues and work together collaboratively on those issues. And I also developed a community kitchen directory for those wanting to host events or just use community kitchens in a collaborative manner. Year two, things really got rolling. I helped the local food initiative start up the farmers market. Published a free and low-cost food and meal guide for folks to access things like the community Christmas dinner and food recovery program and things like that, Soup and Smile, all that jazz. The local food initiative commissioned a greenhouse feasibility study for the community and what would work here, and that's still sitting there waiting to be used and will be one day, so really valuable information there. I hosted a value-added food processing workshop. So value-added food is things like chocolates and soups and salad dressings, all those non-basic ingredient things, which is a huge gap in our local food system. There's not much of that being produced, so I hosted a workshop on all the regulatory hurdles that have to happen with that type of food. I also published a local agriculture learning guide, so those looking to get into farming and food production have some more resources to how they could build their knowledge. And we also, at Community Connection, hired a community food and outreach coordinator, and their main job was to run the food recovery program and to increase nutritional programming at the food bank. So lots of good work has been done through there. So in our last year, which wraps up at the end of March, not all of this work is because of just me, but the school district was able to expand their breakfast program, and now there's breakfast every day in every school, which is awesome. The farmers market coupon program was expanded greatly this year. I think it went from about $12,000 to $21,000 given out in our community for mostly distributed through the food bank and also through other Community Connections programmings to expecting mothers and young families. So huge boon there because it all goes to our local vendors. It's just straight up handing over the money through that coupon system. I hosted a land linking workshop last January where we had 25 attendees. 23 of them were people looking for land to grow food. 2 of them were landowners. So you can see the scale is a little bit unbalanced there, but indicating a really strong interest in farming in our community. And from that, we started working on developing a community farm. The food bank garden was developed this past summer out at Take to Heart Mill. They donated some land and helped build a garden and a greenhouse out there, and all of the food went to the food bank. In the fall, I hosted a farming capital workshop. The 3 key elements to getting into farming are land access, capital, and knowledge. So I'm always looking at those 3 things and how to improve upon them. So brought together 10 different presenters to talk about the different resources available for farming capital in our region. And also hosted an on-farm water management workshop that was identified through that farmer networking group that's an issue that they have, is on-farm management, and climate change is just going to make it more and more of an issue. Community Connections also hosted the Food Explorers program, which is for vulnerable youth, getting them comfortable in the kitchen and using kitchen tools and creating meals. And Food Connect, the food recovery program, received a refrigerated van this year to do all their pickups, and it's been spectacular being able to use that and keeping our food really safe. And one of the highlights for me this year was being invited to the Ministry of Agriculture's Committee for New Entrants. They have an advisory committee to build out resources to get more young people into farming. So really honored to be part of a small group there. So it's been a lot of great work, and Revelstoke's food system is definitely growing. There's a lot of interest in it, a lot of investment in it, and things are going really well. So the ball's rolling, but there's still lots to do, of course. This work doesn't end. A little list there of some of the things that I'm looking to continue to work on and build within our community and just keep growing that local food system. So a couple quotes there about the importance of looking at food security in light of climate change, how we use our land, and I really like the last one there, that food security is a pillar for democracy. A really important part of being human is eating good food, and the way that I look at all of the work that I do is that food is way more than nourishment and feeding our bodies. It's about social cohesion. It brings us together and it makes us a strong community. So it's an important thing to be looking at. So that's all I have for you today. I'm just wondering if there's any questions about the work or the future or what we've done.
Councillor Sherlock.
And what's the future? What does the future look like for the next stages for your role and the role in food security in Revelstoke?
Well, the goal is to keep working on the recommendations, try and complete those as best we can. There's a lot in there. Some of them are really lofty, some of them are attainable. Most of the attainable ones have been checked off already, of course. And it all comes down to funding, which is the big thing. So the last 3 years, the majority of the funding have come from that interior health funding, and that's done at the end of March, and so we're busy right now applying for more funding. So depending on what we get determines what we do. Yeah.
Councillor Cross.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, first of all, great presentation. I've had the pleasure, this is my second time seeing it, because I started at CSR.
That's right, a little different.
Yeah, well, it brings tears to my eyes. Great work, great work.
Thank you.
Super. Anyway, my question is, with all the work you've done and all the studies you've looked at, what do you assess our capability as a community of reviving or building a hothouse industry here on our ALR lands?
Well, when I spoke with our regional agrologist with the Ministry of Agriculture and put the question to him, what do you see as our best potential? Where can we make the most impact in our local food system? He said greenhouses. And while greenhouses aren't perfect in terms of their environmental impact, their use of light and heat and all that sort of stuff, they do mitigate a lot of the outdoor elements and climate change and all that jazz. So I think there's good potential there. What I think we need to start thinking about here in Revelstoke is not just traditional farming. Looking at vertical growing, indoor growing, rooftop growing. Let creativity be the determinant, not tradition.
All right, thanks.
Anyone else? Well, Melissa, thank you. Appreciate your input, and from my experience with farming in my personal life and whatnot, I'm always supportive of making sure we have good food, and when you look at the size of me, you can see that I need good food. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Okay, we're going to move on if we can. So we're going to go into staff reports. The first one is Community Economic Development, the MDT tax. Ms. Braun, do you have a presentation? Do you want to speak to that before we go forward, or are you okay with me just going ahead? Go ahead. All right. So there is a thing for you to read and bring forward. Is there anyone that wants to bring that forward? Councillor Yonker?
Your Worship. 11A, that the proposed allocation of municipal and regional district tax online accommodation platform tax revenue to affordable housing initiatives, pending the recommendations of the housing strategy, be supported.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sherlock. Is there any discussion on the motion? So I believe this is just bringing forward our ability to utilize the MRDT funds for housing strategy here in the community and some of the housing initiatives that we need to bring forward.
That's correct, although specifically the online accommodation platform.
So those are the funds that would be, the online funds are the ones that would be used for the housing strategy. Thank you.
So
Go ahead, Councilor.
the online, is that the Airbnbs, the vacation homes, and the existing hotels pay a 2% tax for, or collect a 2% tax.
Yes,
Is
so
that right?
it's part of general MRDT revenue that goes towards tourism marketing.
So this funding is now going to be dedicated to affordable homes. Is
That's
that
right.
completely the full funding collected, or?
From the online accommodation, yes, that's the intent.
Councilor Cross?
Just clarify for me, so the hotels were getting some money for tourism, and that money's being rerouted now?
No, the online accommodation platform tax is going to begin to be collected this year.
Okay.
It's a new source of revenue.
So that's an additional 2%?
Yes, the MRDT money.
So now we're talking about GST 5%, provincial sales tax 8%, tourism tax 2%, is it, or 3? 2, I believe.
Accommodation tax is 2%.
Accommodation tax.
Years too.
And then a new one.
No, it'll
No.
be the 2% that's applied to online accommodation platforms like Airbnb.
Okay,
So
that's the
they're
key I'm
joining-
looking for.
yes,
So,
they are now
so
being closed.
if one of our hotels books the reservation online, we're not taking that 2% away from tourism. That's the clarity I want. Yeah,
But that's tourism marketing.
yeah, got it. Thank you.
Councilor Yonker?
Ms. Ron, I just want to clarify, so when would that money begin to be collected then?
I believe it starts flowing in March,
Okay.
and we have a couple of different estimates about the proposed amount of revenue. It may be as high as $100,000, but we're really not. It's hard to validate that.
Of course, yeah, we don't know what's going on. Okay, thanks.
But it can be accumulated year over year, so we'll.
Pardon me?
It can be accumulated year over year, so
Okay.
we'll.
Okay.
So we don't have to spend that money in the first year. It can be an ongoing running total until we have something that we can define what we want to spend the money on.
Yes.
And sorry, Your Worship, one more question then. I read this, but it's kind of confusing for me, so I'll just clarify here. Who would be responsible then for holding or managing these funds? Would it go to the Revelstoke Housing Society then would be responsible for that, or is it sitting on the city then, right?
It's on the.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay. Thank you.
So has the proposal been forwarded about collecting the tourism tax from the Airbnb and vacation homes as well? Is that on the table, or is that?
That's part of the online. That's what we're talking about. This motion is just the online platform.
But the hotels contribute to a fund that's matched by the government for the infrastructure as well.
That goes to their tourism marketing, is that correct, Mr. Schwartz?
Well, you mentioned infrastructure, so some confusion, I guess. The hotels collect the 2% additional hotel tax, which is exclusively for tourism marketing and programs. The province collects those amounts from the hotels. It remits it to the city, and we hand it over to the Revelstoke Accommodation Association, 100% of it. Now, because we're one of the 14 designated resort municipalities, we're eligible to participate in the Resort Municipality Initiative, which pays over to the eligible municipalities that have implemented a tourism marketing tax, a percentage amount of the provincial sales tax that's already levied on the hotel rooms. And so it used to be formula-based, but the province capped it a few years ago. But we get roughly 3% of the provincial sales tax charged on commercial accommodation for tourism infrastructure. And that's what funds things like Williamson Lake Park, the Snowmobile Club Welcome Center, Groomers for the Nordic Club, mountain bike trails, those golf course improvements, those types of things. And so, yeah, there's different pots of money. It's hard, and now there's this additional new MRDT being collected on the online accommodation. Anybody selling over $2,500 a year's worth of rooms is required now to collect PST and MRDT and GST and remit that. And the province has allowed municipalities to decide if that should be used for affordable housing, because they've recognized in tourist communities, employee housing has become a really serious issue.
Any other questions? Any other discussion on this matter? Okay, and call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. So we're going to go on to 11B, the Parks, Recreation, and Culture arena roof structure. So there's a motion in your package. Is there any one of you that would like to make this motion? Councillor Brooks Hill.
That a grant funding application for upgrades to the Revelstoke Arena and Curling Club facility, which consists of replacing the roof and increasing accessibility by adding an entry vestibule, a lift, and a female change room, be submitted through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Rural and Northern Communities.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott. So discussion on this motion. Some of you may have questions, but I just wanted to say a few things as we go on here. It's rare that we see a grant application come for Parks and Rec infrastructure. So many councils over the years, probably for the last 25 years, have been kicking this arena roof down the road because the cost has been like $7 million projected. Until we get to this point where most councils would be envious to say, all of a sudden we have the opportunity to apply for a grant that may make our roof on our arena actually safe or consistent with carrying on for another 20, 30, or 40 years. So we now have this grant before us. City staff have presented this to us and would like to apply for the grant. So some of you were concerned that there was no public consultation on this, and unfortunately when we get these grant things put before us, it's very quick that we need to act on them. So if you put this through today, city staff will have the ability to apply for the grant. Then if we receive the grant, or prior to us receiving the grant, we would have to do the borrowing bylaw. And we do the borrowing bylaw where we go up to third reading, suggesting that we may need to borrow 10 million or 5 million or whatever. If we receive the grant, then we go to public consultation, because the public get to weigh in through electric consent as to whether we get to spend the money on the roof, to borrow the money, pardon me. So that's where the community gets to weigh in and say, yes, we want this done, or no, we don't want you to spend this money on the roof. And if we don't spend the money on the roof, then the grant goes back. We don't get to keep it. We don't get to spend it on anything else. Am I correct on that? We don't get to move it to a new arena. So we're not really in a position to have a new arena at this point in time because we haven't gone to the community, but also where do we put it? I mean, there's all kinds of suggestions out there. So I'm just weighing in from my perspective. Some of you may have some questions or would like to discuss this further. So if you would like to weigh in, Mr. Chabot, do you have anything further you would like to, am I on track with what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you are, Your Worship. Just because we apply for a grant doesn't obligate the community or necessarily imply the public's consent to borrow the money to meet our share. But as you know, this is a rare opportunity, 90% grant funding for upgrades to a community facility. So for every dollar we raise locally, we can spend 10 improving a facility. And people say, well, if you're going to spend 10 on a 60-year-old arena, why don't you spend 21 on a new arena? Well, we don't have the necessary plans and the specifications to take advantage of the grant opportunity on this timeline, but because of the period of time that the state of the arena roof has been studied, we have the necessary engineering reports, history, and forward-looking plans to rehabilitate the facility. And I think for every dollar to be able to spend 10 on our facility and give it an extended life is a good investment. There's life cycle maintenance costs in the building. There would be with a new one as well. They'd be somewhat deferred for your first several years of operation, but you'd get into the cycle of having to refresh your plant and your equipment and capital as well. Choosing a site that's suitable, arranging for parking and that are all challenges I think this is an opportunity we should take advantage of. As you know, the community's known for many, many years, it needed to spend $7 million. This never made the budget once, and here's an opportunity.
Right, thank you. Councillor Young.
Ms. Donato, thanks, Your Worship. I just want to say, great job, terrific report. Awesome. So I've got a few things I want to say. One of them, Your Worship, it kind of sounded there like when you're talking about the location of the new arena, I agree, reading through the various reports there, that the proposed location, it's mentioned down by the sewage lagoons, is absolutely a horrendous idea and all sorts of things. You're right, I agree that we should be going, if the government is willing to offer us a potential to get tons of money, this is great. Let's grab the money, which we failed to do on another grant recently, so seeing this is terrific. I think it's awesome, and that's why I think the reports are awesome. But what I disagree with, and this is my opinion, is the lack of community consultation. The optics around it have really angered me, because this is why I ran for council, is that this stuff went on and nobody was consulted until the Mountaineer had to put out an article. Yes, it was one of the worst kept secrets in Revelstoke. We all knew that the roof would have to be replaced eventually, but you're right, it's been kicked down the can. It's been, I don't know, 20, 25 years probably. I talked to a mayor from 20 years ago that said, yeah, it came up in their time as well. But again, I come back to the optics and the communication, and I've spoken to several councillors from up north in the Lower Mainland, former mayors. I had a mayor reach out to me that I had never even talked to him in my life and said, is this true? And it's outrageous. You can go on Google, and it takes 5 minutes to find the amount of towns that are applying for this grant, a couple of them in regards to arenas. The same thing, the grant came out in October, and my understanding is, from reading these reports, the last one was completed in 2017, I believe. Ms. Donato?
Your Worship, are you referring to a report?
The report that you included in here, the last one that was done on the roof, there wasn't one done this year in 2018. Am I correct on that?
Correct.
Okay. So I just don't understand. I understand there was a municipal election. There's lots of stuff going on. We have a new council. But when I go on Google and I looked at these other communities and look at these other media press releases and talking about arenas and other things, because there's so many things with this grant that you could apply for, things such as Indigenous and all sorts of things in the community, and this is a great one for the recreational center. But I just don't understand why Revelstoke can't have the community consultation prior to when other communities can. And I understand what you're saying, that if we apply for this grant and we get it, we can come out to the community, and you're right, I agree. We shouldn't be making that decision without the public consult on possibly spending all this money. But I think if we had the proper communication and consultation or something, that there's a whole lot of great ideas out there. And I agree with Mr. Chabot's comments about, I agree, I don't think we have $20 million or $21 million to be spending on a new arena when we can't find funds for a sidewalk right now up near an elementary school. So I agree, that's outrageous, in my opinion.
So Councillor, I'm just going to draw you back to the motion that's on the table. I get where you're coming from about the communication, and we can talk about communication. So when I think of communication on this, so if we're able to go out to the community now, and the community approved this to go forward, and we applied for the grant, then we have to go to the borrowing bylaw. We have to go back to the community to allow that, to ask them to borrow the money. And they have the opportunity at that point to shut us down. So you're going back to the community just hear me out. You're going to the community once to get their input, and they're going to give us all their input. And this is all hypothetical. And then we're going back, once we get the grant, let's say we got $9 million, right. We're going back to them and saying, okay, well, we need to borrow $5 million or whatever it is to complete the project. We're going over 5 years, so we need electorate consent to borrow this. So now we're going back to them, and at that point, the electorate says no. So you've gone to the community twice.
That's democracy.
Yep, that's fine. That's okay. The timeline here for us to get out to the community to get this done wasn't there. Am I wrong with that? Or am I correct with that, Ms. Donato? I'll just direct that to you.
Bishop, you are correct. The grant application came out in October, just before the election. So I did not feel it was appropriate to bring forward any sooner to a council that was on its way out and a new council coming in. It is a heavy topic that the former council did. Had a few reports come to them and got to the community consultation stage on the project.
Right.
So had we had more notice of the grant opportunity, we could have gone out for community consultation, but having a consultation process in December, I'm not sure how we would have achieved that. It would have been very difficult to achieve. I would have nothing to bring to them in terms of a new facility and what that would look like.
Right, and I understand, Ms. Donato, and I respect your thoughts there, Anthony. It's a brand new council. This is a huge decision. Like, yeah, absolutely. And I'd go back to it's like the Williamson Lake on the first day. Absolutely, I understand you there. And this is just my opinion and my frustration, because I hear that, but then again, it just comes back to me looking at other councils that have also changed and have had the ability to go out. And this isn't saying that I don't think this is a great. These reports are terrific. Ms. Donato's done an amazing job here, and she continues to. It just comes for me that it's just frustrating, and I've heard it from so many people prior to me even going onto Facebook. As soon as that article hit, I had phone calls. And also because you've got minor hockey here, figure skating, curling, and whatever the option we go with, these options weren't even, it's my understanding from speaking with certain people of these groups, that they didn't even know about this. So that's the problem that's the part I have a huge problem with. It's not the report, it's not Ms. Donato's work, it's nothing like that. It's just the consultation part, and for me, this seems to be like a DCC 2.0 all over again.
Okay.
Communication.
So, thank you. I appreciate where you're coming from. Mr. Schwartz.
Your Worship, just a little bit of history for council, because all of them except yourself are new. Council received Mr. Huco's report in a closed meeting in November of 2017. There was a good deal of discussion. There was no motions passed, but the clear understanding from staff was that this item was going to be deferred for budget deliberations after the new council had taken office in a little more than a year. So had this grant opportunity not come along, the process would have looked entirely differently, and it would have been a community conversation and a council conversation about can we fund, whether it's 7 or 10 or 21 million on our own. I think the complexion of the conversation would have been hugely different. I think the time allowed for that. We just thought this is an opportunity too good to pass up. I hear we're being criticized again for a grant application opportunity we didn't take advantage of which 40 of the communities that did, it was not-for-profit associations or societies in those communities, not municipalities. So it's your state of readiness and your capacity to do things, and we felt we were ready to make a good application for this one. If council approves this today, it's probably 2 weeks' work to complete the application. Is that right? Did it take about that long?
Probably more.
Probably more.
Yeah.
So.
And so here we are asking council, our backs are against the wall in terms of time. We'd like to do that.
Any other further discussion, Councillor Elliott?
So just the criteria for the application, it has to be for access. One of the stipulations is all right, and then possible about infrastructure it's multiple, male, female, all use. Is that right?
Yeah, access, inclusivity. Because we're asking for a total project value of $10 million, there's going to have to be a climate lens analysis, greenhouse gas analysis to meet federal regulation. There's a lot involved in this one.
So our ask, say we put in our $1 million, the maximum is 10, is that we can apply for. If we put in one, the maximum that will be granted.
They'll fund 90%.
90%. Okay. Yeah. So we don't have to. If we choose differently in the future, we can tone it down. We can choose a different, and the grant will match that. Is that right?
Councillor Ryan, did you have?
Yeah. So I guess my interpretation of the grant is that it's to, like Councillor Elliott said, is to improve the access and quality of the cultural, recreational, community infrastructure. I think it's a great opportunity, and we should definitely take advantage of it. But I would also, my interpretation is that they probably would only fund the lift, the change room, and the addition, and not necessarily a roof replacement, since that's not considered an improvement, right?
It's a big ask. There's $95 million for all communities in the province under 25,000, which is probably 140 of them.
Sorry,
so we're asking for about 10%.
Right.
That's what I'm saying, is 95 million was the total.
But how many other communities are as ready as we are to make a good application?
Probably a few. It's, there's a few arenas out there, I'm sure, that are built.
Lots of them.
Yeah, that also need a lot of improvements. I don't know, I think it's still a great idea. would caution that there might be a significant portion of that put on taxpayers.
Councillor Yonker.
So just further on Councillor Ryan's point then to Ms. Donato or Mr. Chabot through you, your worship. So I just want to clarify then, because I read it and I've heard it, and I want to make sure that I understand this. If council today, Ms. Donato, was to approve this grant for you guys to move forward here in regards to the cost, if the provincial and feds came back and said, you know, you're asking a little bit too much, we'll give you $5 million. At that point, can we as a council go, you know what, or with public consultation, which I'm all for, can we then make that decision there to say, you know what, we don't have the $5 million, we thought maybe we could pitch in $1 million, but $5 million is too much for us to pitch in. Thanks, but no thanks. Can we back out?
Through your worship, yes, you can back out.
And then, sorry, just to continue on that point, but from reading in this grant here, when they want to see what the project is that we're proposing, right? So if we're proposing this, the changing of the roof and the change rooms and the elevator and stuff like that, once this application is submitted and you've done your months-long work of these reports, at no time there, once we have submitted it, can we alter the project based on the grant that we receive?
Through your worship, yes. You're able to alter the grant. So you would have to submit your revised plan to the funding organization and ask them permission to do so.
Prior to receiving the grant or after?
After.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cross.
And just continuing in that vein, could that be as much as deciding to do a new arena at that point, as opposed to a roof rebuild?
That I am not sure.
Does anybody have any information on that? My concern is, you know, this is a great opportunity. Why aren't we going for gold and ask for a new spectator arena?
Through your worship, because we don't have anything to move forward with an application of that sort. There's a lot of requirements as part of this application that you'll need to submit: engineering reports, concept plans, different community engagement reports. In this particular case, I have the arena needs assessment that was conducted where the user groups were able to comment on different improvements required in the facility, and the application was catered to address those needs that they brought forward, which were female change rooms, an entry vestibule, a lift to the change room areas. That all came from what we heard from the user groups. So that was incorporated into this application.
Since we have so much community interest here at the moment, could you clarify for me and for the audience what's the impact of a new roof project? Would we in fact lose a year of functioning? I know if we do a user facility, new user facility, we lose a year. A new spectator facility, we don't, because it'd be in a different place. And but if we just do the roof rebuild and the other upgrades, what is the impact on the community?
It's quite likely we may lose a portion of a season.
But not the whole season.
It's hard to say until we have a contractor in place that can tell us what his timelines are and what exactly would be involved. It's quite intricate work, I guess, to replace the roof with the beams. So it's very specific, detailed work, and it could take a full year. But we don't know what that would look like. It could be February to January. So in essence, it seems like it would be a loss of a season.
So my final comment on...
Just Councillor Cross, Councillor Shirley had her, so just give her a moment.
So, do we have any indication of when the grant would be, the winners would be announced? How long of a time frame, or if they left that
Ms.
vague?
Donato, do you have any information as to what the procedure is with that?
Your worship, it was not indicated on the application. No.
Okay.
Your worship, I could add to that because I spoke to the provincial government this morning. They said most likely it would be released prior to summer, the announcement of who's receiving the grant.
Okay.
Thank you.
My question, where I'm going with it is, it says in the report that we would need to start work within 2 years of the grant. So this would potentially need to get started in time for the 21-22 season? Correct-ish, thereabouts?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Cross.
I just had a comment that I sort of understand the process limitations, and I certainly understand the capacity limitations that we have within our city staff at the moment to respond to these things. But it is extremely, you know, echoing Councillor Yonker's comments, it's pretty discouraging And I would encourage senior staff and our CAO to make sure in the upcoming budget there is enough capacity built into that budget so that we can respond in a better way on community consultation and engagement. I'm not sure I buy that we couldn't have done something. This community comes out and they come out big when something like this is happening. And I think we could have got something done in December, maybe not a full-on consultation, but at least a barometer. We need to include our citizens.
Councillor Cross, we'll just go back to, so this comes down to communication. I understand where you're getting, where you're going. I know that you're frustrated with the procedure. I appreciate that, and we'll talk about communication going forward. But I'll just bring you back. Is there any other comments in relation to this that's on the table?
That was my comment, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Yonker.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair to Ms. Donato, I just had a question about the snow removal then, the $20,000 charge. How many times since we've implemented that from the, I believe it was the 2014 report, how many times a year, or do you have the numbers of how often we have to do it? Maybe it was in there and I might have missed it, but.
Through Your Worship, we typically on an annual basis, we remove it once a year.
Okay.
There have been occasions where it was removed twice.
Okay. But it's not a 5 or 10 thing, something like that, but it's still $20,000 approximately each time.
Yeah, $20,000 each time.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chabot, did you have something before Councillor Ryan?
No, just in regards to questions about funding announcements, my expectation would be it would have to be made before the writ for a federal election this spring or summer is dropped. Probably here, so May, June, maybe.
That's what they had said exactly, Your Worship. It's before the writ will be dropped.
Good, thank you. Councillor Ryan?
I forgot what I was going to ask, sorry.
Councillor Shirley, did you have something else to go back to?
Oh, I was just muttering about how rude the timing is to make a big grant application like this available during municipal elections. For us all to scramble and get together in time over the Christmas holidays, it's just, yeah. Well, it makes it hard to do good governance.
Councillor Yonker.
Worship, one more question. We're actually probably got a few to be honest, but Ms. Donato, or Mr. Chabot can answer. If we're stating here then that we don't, there's no way to really, like Councillor Cross was talking about the arena, and we just don't have, I read there's multiple reports when you go over certain financial things, you have to submit this report and environmental and all these assessments that we don't even have prepared, so I understand that we couldn't even do that. But if we were not prepared to even write a grant for that arena, why was that option then presented in here? Because I get what you're saying that we couldn't, but again, I misunderstand why that option was even in there then if it's really not an option. If that makes sense?
Ms. Donato.
Your Worship, I was trying to provide council with options in dealing with the arena facility. So an option would be to do nothing with this grant opportunity. I am not sure whether there'll be another intake or not. When we spoke to the government, I made a call as well and asked about future intakes. They could not give me an answer whether there would be another intake or not. So it is risky not to make an application and go through a community consultation process and be prepared for a next intake if there is no next intake. So I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to do that, but I also wanted you to know what your options are. And those options are repair, renovate, or replace, or do nothing. And doing status quo, I don't know how much longer we should be doing that. I mean, the monitoring and removal of snow on the arena roof was meant to be a short-term strategy. You know, 25 years later, we're still doing the same short-term strategy that was suggested. At some point, we need to move forward and deal with the issue at hand. There's going to be a level of expectation from the community, from the users, to move forward with improvements in the arena facility that we have been holding off. If it's not affecting the plant room, or if it's not a life and safety issue, we're not moving forward with those upgrades, but at some point we need to start moving forward with that.
Absolutely, and I don't disagree. So I just want to make sure though, so you presented the options so that, yeah, council had understanding if we were to do this and just pay the millions and keep going and push it off, which I disagree with that option, or the roof, but options, I think it's 3 and 4, talking about the new arenas. are options for council, but they were never to be part of the options then to be included in this grant application.
That is
That's
correct.
my understanding.
Yes, that
Okay.
is correct.
And then I had one more question here. I'll come back to it, Your Worship. Give me a sec here.
Okay. Councillor Ryan?
I read somewhere in one of those reports that the National Building Code no longer allows the removal of snow, or is going to, I'm not sure if it's come into play or not, removal of snow as a management tactic for reducing the load on the trusses. Is that current yet? Like that was, I think, in the 2017 report. They were saying that that was going to come into play. So does that mean that from a liability standpoint, if something were to happen, that the risks are significantly higher because we were using that tactic?
Through your worship, I did speak to the building inspector regarding that, and that is already in place.
Okay.
And it has been that way for a number of years already.
Gotcha.
So it's,
So we're already, yeah. So liability-wise, it just increases our risk. Yes.
yeah. Mr. Thomas, did you?
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, Your Worship, unless there's a change of use of a building, generally you don't have to meet the current building code. So an existing 100-year-old building doesn't need to meet the snow load requirements that are in the most current version of the code. The only things that sort of as a public facility being an assembly occupancy, we always look at the life safety side of things and do our best to meet those. So things like fire exits and things like that, so that we're meeting just that public expectation. But when it comes to the actual management of the building from a structural perspective, we don't have to meet the current code, but when we build a new roof, we would not be able to use the removal of snow as a strategy to reduce the design of the roof.
Okay. Councillor Yonker?
Your Worship, through you. Ms. Donato, a couple more questions then. Just one. Are you able to tell me when you spoke to the government then? Because I just want to touch base with you after, because the person I've spoken to, and I've taken their names to make sure, the last few weeks several times has told me that there is another grant coming. They just couldn't give me a date, but they basically assured that it is coming. So I don't know, maybe we should discuss after to make sure they're giving the appropriate information to yourself or others. Another question then, so two other questions. If again, council hypothetically is to approve this today and move forward with this grant application, I read in there, I believe, that any cost overruns or issues that come up and about that were unforeseen would then be ultimately the city's responsibility. Those things could not be included in the grant. If that was to foresee happen, and I don't know anything, I don't know if that's where our Director of Engineering would chime in, if they're to find issues putting a roof on, I mean, to my eyes, the building looks like it's pretty structurally sound, and I read in the reports that there doesn't appear to be too many issues with the actual structure, but I'm not sure who would answer this. If it came that they're going to put the roof on and find issues with the structure prior to placing the roof on, and say it was hypothetically $2 million, what would we be doing there then? Would that be coming to council to approve that cost overrun, or I don't know who wants to answer that question?
Yes, it would come back to council.
To approve that, which essentially we would be stuck with having to, because we now sign these contracts and stuff. All right, and then one last question then, again, hypothetically speaking, if we're to approve this grant, again, obviously I understand you're not in construction, I'm not either, so I don't know how long they'll need to put on the roof, but if it was to, impact seasons of the minor hockey and the figure skating and all sorts of things, which is my understanding, we haven't even really consulted with them, but is that something that we would be doing then, speaking with them and helping them, or trying to figure out how we can mitigate the losses and maybe helping moving the team, like the junior B team, for example, or how the minor hockey will survive? Is that something that would be in the plans then, or?
Yes, Your Worship, we would consult with them at that time.
Right.
It's premature to consult with anyone right now about that, because first of all, we don't know if we're going to get the grant.
Right.
And then construction timelines without having that information.
I just want to make sure it would be something that we're planning on doing. All right.
Councillor Ryan?
Just one suggestion for that might be obviously you guys are the experts and we'll deal with that when and if we get to it, but if the job goes into tender and it's a construction management company, it might be worthwhile to include that as part of their contract to try to avoid missing a season, because it seems like there should be some kind of alternate options to avoid having to shut down the facility. Maybe it would cost a little more, or would just take a little longer, more realistically, but I think that should be something that a construction management company would be able to manage. And then at least that way we don't have to lose a season.
I think, Councillor Ryan, I think the staff would look at all those sorts of things to mitigate that, so I appreciate your input on that. So, Councillor Juncker, you have another
Worship,
question?
yeah, one more question for you, Mr. Donovan, and thanks for being so great and having answers here. Is there, I know when we had briefly spoken before, one of our orientations where you were explaining your role in the department and what our goals for the arena would be and everything. Is there some sort of actual vision, coming back to kind of talking about Williamson Lake here, like, possibly spending a few $1 million if we don't get the whole grant to replace the roof? Is there a vision that the city has for the arena on summer usage and getting a little bit more money back? Obviously I understand the conversation with Mr. Thomas that these arenas, they don't make money, we know that, but is there a vision that we could, or how we could come up with one onto better usage all around the year? It's heavily used obviously in the winter. From my eyes, I don't think it's heavily used in the summertime, but is that something that's on the books, or something that maybe council with the Parks Department or maybe a community group should be looking at coming up with over the next couple of years? Or I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think, I know the question's going to Ms. Donato, Councillor Juncker, but I think my experience in the past with the arena, the staff has reached out to many groups to try and utilize that space during the ice out season. So I'll just let Ms. Donato carry on, but I know that definitely Parks and Rec have gone out of their way over the years to find things. So in the summer we have the roller skating group, and we've had other functions in there over the years. And sometimes these things come and go, where we have clubs come in and they will do, they used to do a spring gardening thing in there and things. So those groups sometimes come and go, but
I do understand that, Your Worship. I'm just asking if we actually have a generic vision, because I understand, I believe it was the car show that was here this past summer, but keeping in the back of my hand that we have RMR Resorts here planning on building a massive convention center, which again would take away those shows or a golf show or whatever. So I'm wondering if we're looking ahead to the future to see if we have a vision for the arena, assuming that if RMR down the road is able to build that convention center, that they're most likely going there, not coming here to the arena. So is there other things, and I understand maybe reaching out, but do we have a vision or what we want to do or how we can do it? Is there anything there?
Some of the limitations with the ability or the facility are around accessibility.
Right.
So right now it's not accessible for people with mobility issues.
Right, for sure.
Right, so we're hoping with some of the renovations needed, we can market the facility in a different way. Historically, we've had different user groups in the facility during dry floor rental season. Right now, our primary user is the roller derby girls. In the past, we've had lacrosse, we've had different spring training camps in there. We've had trade shows, different conventions of that sort. We could tend to market those a bit more, but we are limited with accessibility, so that has always been a challenge with that facility. Right. So
hopefully that can change.
With improvements, we can change that as well and be more active in marketing that.
Okay. So that's something, depending on how this thing goes, then that maybe we can look at it and come back to a revision or a remarketing of the awesome. Thank you.
Any further discussion, Councillor Bergson?
So my question is as the motion stands right now, we're either saying yes or no to application for funding for a $10 million project to replace the roof. But are you needing direction from council for the specific way in which the roof is being replaced? Because in the engineering report, there's a number of different options for how to replace the roof that are at different cost levels.
So through your worship, for today, it would be, the most important thing would be getting a recommendation to move forward with the grant application. I'll then come back to you with the particulars of the grant application, where we would iron out wood versus steel, and then a detailed cost analysis so that we could go forward with the borrowing bylaw.
That answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah. I have another question through your worship for Ms. McCabe. I'm a little unclear on the RCFC Legacy Fund, is that what it's called? Would this be the type of project that might be appropriate for us?
The better one for that question would be Dawn, because she's the programs done by the administration, the policy and the procedures. Was it Dawn? Sorry, is it?
Yeah, the arena roof would qualify as meet the criteria of the policy for RCFC legacy funding.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ryan, did you have a further question?
Yeah, so you mentioned that you would come back to council, or sorry, Ms. Donat, or yeah. You mentioned that you'd come back to council with the particulars, but didn't the grant application have to be in by the 23rd of January?
Yes.
So would that be, what day is it today? So that would be the 22nd?
That would be a special council meeting.
Oh, okay, that makes sense, gotcha, okay.
So a special council meeting would have to be called for this one issue then to deal with then for the financial bylaw through the chair then?
Through your worship, we have a few special council meetings scheduled for finance, so we could probably fit it in on one.
Oh, right, yeah.
Would it help you out to just do it now though? I don't know, I'm just curious.
I mean,
Councillor Ryan, I think that would be putting the cart before the horse. I think we need to apply for the grant first before we go anything further.
I think we need to check to see if we need to send a borrowing bylaw that's had first 3 readings but non-elector is sent with the grant application, which means we may be bringing it to council on the 22nd of January.
Yeah, that's
one day before.
That was my interpretation of it, yes.
So you're going to see this again real soon, but we won't go engage the community to earn their support for the borrowing unless the grant is approved.
Right.
That answers your question? Yes, Councillor Ryan?
Sure.
Any other discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Councillor Yonker.
Your Worship, I just want to make a statement then. So this has been really good to hear, and Ms. Donato, again, I can't commend you enough. Like, terrific answers, and thank you for doing a great job. So I will be voting in favor of this, Your Worship, because I do not agree that we should be passing up on the potential here to get huge dollars from the provincial and federal government. Yes, this doesn't always come around. As much as they have told me, they could be misinforming me that this grant is coming again. I'm not going to pass that risk, but I just want to make clear again, moving forward, I know that I've heard the staffing difficulties and everything, but it's just my opinion that if you look at other communities, they were able to come up with this community consultation just on ideas of what to do, maybe multi-purpose arenas. So going forward, I'd like to see better community consultation, just ideas, input, engagement, and not having the town find out via a press release about what's happening. That's such an important idea.
Point taken, Councillor. So any other discussion, Councillor Ryan?
Just one last comment, I guess maybe I can bring it up at the next meeting, but if we go with option 3, which I think was the new spectator facility, my only thought is that by not having curling, that's sort of like reducing the accessibility and the diversity of people, so the federal government might not want to fund as much of it.
We're not even asking for that. We're asking for the roof on the current facility, which is not option 3. Is that correct, Ms. Donato?
Your Worship, that is correct. We do not have enough information to make a grant application for a new facility at this time. If we do get turned down, if we're not successful in receiving this grant opportunity, we can move forward with a community consultation process and hopefully be ready for a second intake at that time. I'm not sure when the second intake will be. That would be my only concern. It could be, we're notified in May and maybe the second intake is in September. I'm not sure how that works and whether that would give us enough time to get prepared for a second intake application.
Thank you. Any other further discussion on the motion that's on the table? So I'm going to ask you to vote now on the grant funding application. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Going to move on to correspondence. We'll just wait a moment as people exit. Motion 12A under correspondence, the Barraware Society request a letter of support. Each year, beginning of the year, the Barraware ask us to give them a letter of support for their grant applications. So they've been doing very well in this community, so I'm going to ask if there's someone that would like to put this motion on. Councillor Ryan?
That a letter of support be written to Revelstoke Barraware for 2019 grant applications.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Elliott? Any discussion on the motion?
How much does the city contribute to that?
Do any of us know how much we contribute? Ms. McCabe? Zero?
Emotional support.
Oh, yeah. Letters of support, yes. That's good.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Communications, is there any comments on the bylaw enforcement monthly report for November? Councillor Yonker.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a question for Ms. Lowe, as it's one of the many jobs that you do, or manage, or whatever. I've got a question about bylaw tickets because I've heard things and I just want to clarify. Are bylaw tickets that are issued, are they actually like enforceable to make people pay through, like, for instance, if you didn't pay your toll bridge thing down when I was living in the Lower Mainland, you couldn't renew your driver's license, but is there any way to make these actually enforceable? For instance, like, you know, I heard from a barber back in the summer and heard it the other day from another restaurant, if bylaw was to ticket a vehicle from, say, Alberta, that's sitting on the street for a long time, can they just essentially laugh it off, rip the ticket and leave without us being able to make them pay? Is it kind of like an honor system?
Through Your Worship. We use the municipal ticket information bylaw for enforcing our bylaw tickets at this point. Part of my work plan this year is to bring forward what adjudication would look like, which is a little bit of a different system, gives us a little bit, we don't have to come up with as much proof to enforce the tickets.
Okay.
And then that would actually really help with traffic issues. Right now, if we serve a ticket and the person is by the vehicle or near the vehicle and we can get their information if they're out of province and they don't pay the ticket, we can use the collections.
Okay.
Or payment here.
Okay.
We do have a privacy policy with ICBC with respect to BC tickets, so we can gather information if we leave a ticket on someone's vehicle that isn't there. But Alberta, it does get more difficult to enforce the tickets.
Furthermore, then, just following up then, the process that you map, like the collections and stuff, would that actually end up being cost more to do that than it is to actually receive the ticket though? Do you know that offhand?
The adjudication, from the little bit of research that I've done, and most municipalities use both systems, so it would be good to introduce it. No, because we'd be able to process more tickets. And we wouldn't have that 91% burden of proof if there was a dispute, because we just use an adjudicator, and you only have to have 51% burden of proof. So preparation for court, if there's a dispute, is a lot less. So it would pay for itself.
Okay, so just one last question then. I looked on your report for 2018 tickets issued was 373, but we've only had 124 actually paid.
And then you have to also take off the 129, because those tickets are warning tickets, but they're included in that 373. Brings it to...
That are issued, correct?
Yeah.
Right, so...
120 left outstanding.
Right, okay, so just a question then. Is it something that we've considered just from history. I know a few people that work in those departments, and there's a few municipalities that have just basically essentially gone away from the warning and just driven to ticketing just because of the lack of actual enforcement. Obviously, in regards to certain things, maybe Bear thing, it's more of an enforcement than a collection agency. But is that something that we've even considered, or
Just a ticket without warning?
moving more to a ticketing system based off a warning system?
Previous council's direction was to do bylaw compliance and to educate and warn. So if this council decided they wanted me to be more proactive and move more into ticketing, that would be a policy that we would establish.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the bylaw? How about the community policing report for November 2018? Any comments or questions on that report? Moving on to the business license summary, December 2018. Any questions or concerns? Hearing none. Any questions from the press? Eric?
Your Worship, I just had one clarification question based on what Mr. Chabot said about the time. What would need to be done before the 23rd in terms of elector assent or bylaw? Or
Your Worship, I think an application is going to need to be accompanied by an indication of the community's willingness to fund their percentage share of the project approved, and that would be evidenced by a borrowing bylaw that had 3 readings from council, but had not been submitted for elector assent yet. They want to see that you've made provision and a willingness to fund your percentage before they're going to seriously consider your application.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. I'm going to ask for a motion to go in camera pursuant to sections 90.1C and 90.2C of the Community Charter. Councillor Brooks Hills, Councillor Cross, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.